They didn't just lie. They didn't just believe the lie. They kept going. Because no one stopped them. Because no one could. This is what happens when power gains momentum. Not thoughtful, deliberate power, but blind, unchecked, accelerating power, driven by ego, fueled by silence, and steered by no one. It's the momentum of madness, and history has seen it before. Let's look at Napoleon. By the time he crowned himself emperor in 1804, Napoleon had already silenced most dissent. He had reshaped the press, exiled critics, and surrounded himself with generals who saluted instead of questions. At first, his campaigns were brilliant. Austria, Prussia, Italy, victory after victory. But something was changing. Each triumph made him bolder. Each cheer made him louder. And the further he went, the more unstoppable he felt. No one dared tell him he was wrong. And if they did, they disappeared or were ignored. So when he planned to invade Russia, a few voices whispered warnings. Too vast, too cold, too late. But the engine had already started. The myth had to be fed. He had to prove again that Napoleon could not fail. And when the army froze and starved, he didn't retreat with shame. He retreated with a new narrative. France shall rise again. Even in defeat, the momentum continued. Now look at Trump. From day one, his movement thrived on disruption. Drain the swamp. Fake news. Only I can fix it. Each controversy only made him more popular with his base. Each scandal, a badge of honor. Each time someone tried to stop him, he doubled down. And those around him, they learned quickly. Loyalty mattered more than truth. Agreement mattered more than expertise. So they stopped pushing back. They started enabling. And slowly, like Napoleon, Trump became the center of a spinning storm where no one dared say enough. By 2020, the lies weren't just words. They had motion. They had inertia. They were marching. And when the election loss came, the myth couldn't stop. It wouldn't stop. Because by then, stopping meant collapsing. It meant admitting the truth. It meant breaking the mirror. And so he charged forward. Lawsuits, press conferences, rallies. Then, January 6, a movement no longer led by strategy, but by its own force. That's what the momentum of madness looks like. It doesn't start insane. It starts powerful, effective, even visionary. But without friction, without people who can say no, it begins to spin. And soon, it stops serving truth and starts serving itself. Let's pause here. Why didn't anyone stop them? Because stopping a myth is dangerous. Because dissent feels like betrayal. Because when a leader becomes a symbol, disagreement becomes heresy. Napoleon didn't just command armies, he was France. To question him was to question the nation. Trump didn't just lead a party, he was the movement. To criticize him was to be a rhino, a traitor, a sellout. So the people who could have slowed things down, they stayed quiet. They played along. Some even joined the chant. Not because they believed, but because they were afraid of losing power, of losing favor, of losing their place inside the myth. And that's how momentum builds, not with force, but with silence. It builds because no one resists. Let's look at the consequences. For Napoleon, the march into Russia was not the end. It was the beginning of collapse. But he didn't stop. He regrouped. He launched new campaigns. He kept chasing the image until he stood at Waterloo, surrounded, outmaneuvered, alone. And even then, he couldn't say, "I lost." He was exiled, but in his mind, he was still emperor, still destined, still right. For Trump, the end wasn't the loss. It was the refusal to accept it. The endless rallies, the echo chambers, the growing rage. And on January 6, the momentum hit the steps of the Capitol. Glass shattered, flags waved, the myth marched, and reality screamed. But still, he didn't stop. Because once a myth moves on its own, you're no longer in control. You're just hanging on. Let's ask the real question. Could they have been stopped? Yes, but only early. Only when the engine was still slow. Only when voices still mattered. But once the applause drowns the warning, once the crowd becomes the shield, once every challenge is framed as attack, then it's too late. Because now the story runs itself. Now the leader becomes a passenger. They're not guiding the myth, they're trapped inside it. And that is the greatest tragedy, not just for them, but for everyone. Because a myth in motion crushes people. It burns countries. It erases truth. And when it finally stops, the silence is deafening. Napoleon's empire shattered. France bled. Millions died. All because no one said, "Slow down." Trump's rhetoric shattered unity. A nation divided. Trust eroded. All because few dared say, "You're wrong." And so we arrive here, in the aftermath, still sifting through truth and fiction, still paying the cost. But this isn't just about them. This is about leadership, about power, about us. We worship strength. We fear uncertainty. So we follow those who seem sure, even when they're not. We choose motion over reflection, speed over wisdom, noise over truth. But if we don't learn, it will happen again. Another myth, another mirror, another leader who can't be questioned, another crowd that forgets to ask, "Where are we going?" And then, once again, no one will stop them.